OCO, I'm Jen Deerinwater. I'm the founding executive director of Crushing Colonialism, and I'm beyond pleased to bring to you Indigenous Spoonies Revolt, Disability and Illness in Indigenous Arts, sponsored by the Disability Visibility Project. The Disability Visibility Project is an online community dedicated to creating, sharing, and amplifying disability media and culture. Crushing Colonialism's mission is to uplift and tell the stories of Indigenous people through multimedia work while supporting those doing the work. Our organization is founded and operated by Indigenous people working in a variety of media fields across the world. We work to increase the pay and employment of Indigenous media makers while also promoting their work, providing funding for media projects, and increasing access to professional representation. In doing this, we control our narratives in order to crush colonialism. So a little bit more about myself. I am a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and I was raised between my nation's reservation in rural Oklahoma and in Abilene, Texas. I'm currently based in occupied Piscataway land known as Washington, D.C. When I'm not busy with community organizing, I work as a freelance journalist and a writer, and I'm a mama to two adorably demanding cats. So I myself am multiply disabled and chronically ill. So Indigenous Spoonies Revolt means a great deal to me personally. Indigenous and disabled, deaf, ill, and mad people know the pain and trauma of multiple oppressions. We know what it's like to have to beat down doors to even be seen, and that's if we're even able to physically access the door. As the US celebrated the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act in July, disabled and ill Native people have seen little change despite the ADA. According to the National Council on Disability, an estimated 22% of American Indian and Alaska Native people experience disabilities, the highest rate of any racial or ethnic group in the US. We have the least access to culturally relevant programs and services. In New Zealand, the Ministry of Health estimates that 26% of Maori people experience disabilities. Like their Indigenous counterparts in the US, they suffer from the highest disability rate and deal with restricted access to culturally sensitive programs and services. Indigenous Spoonies Revolt is about telling our stories and sharing our work with you, which includes our pain and trauma, but it's also an opportunity to honor our ancestors and let our resilience shine. Access is a high priority for us at Crushing Colonialism. So we are providing American and New Zealand Sign Language interpretation, as well as English captioning for this event. We'll also give visual descriptions of ourselves in a moment and announce our names when we speak throughout the event. We also acknowledge that digital access is another large hurdle for Indigenous people to overcome. And we're always looking for opportunities to share our work with our relatives who are without telecommunication services. If you're interested in discussing options, please email me at crushingcolonialism@gmail.com. And so on to the event. I have the pleasure of introducing our performers and panelists tonight. So joining us, we have Tony Enos, Kera Sherwood-O'Regan, and Frank Waln. So Tony Enos, who is Cherokee, has been hailed as the most exciting performer to come out of Philadelphia since Patti LaBelle by GMBnews.com. He's a two-time Native American Music Awards nominee and HIV positive artist who celebrates over a decade as a singer, songwriter, producer, electrifying live stage entertainer, and activist. Always encouraging love wherever he goes and fighting for our youth, the Philadelphia native was voted 2017 Native Trailblazer Indie Music Awards Artist to Watch for his single Two-Spirit, which has become the Two-Spirit movement's anthem. In addition to Tony's ongoing philanthropic efforts in the LGBTQ2S community and youth rights, HIV/AIDS awareness, and domestic violence awareness, the musician is bringing attention to Native American, First Nations, and Indigenous issues such as Two-Spirit reclamation and healing. The Vegas-style entertainer released his self-written and self-produced fourth studio album, Positive, which is now available on iTunes and everywhere worldwide. Kera Sherwood-O'Regan, Kāi Tahu, is an Indigenous and disabled multidisciplinary storyteller and rights advocate based in Aotearoa, New Zealand. She is the co-founder and communications and impact director at Activate, an Indigenous and disabled social impact agency specializing in campaigning and narratives for social change. Her work focuses on centering structurally oppressed communities in social change, exploring community-led collective storytelling, and seeks to raise the bar for free, prior, informed, and ongoing consent in the media. Kera's work is grounded in Kāi Tahu Māori practices and approaches and is informed by 15 years of activism within the climate movement. In her spare time, she runs Fibromyalgia Aotearoa New Zealand and advocates for Indigenous rights at the United Nations climate negotiations and within the wider climate movement. And last but not least, we have Frank Waln with us. He's an award-winning Sicangu Lakota hip-hop artist and music producer from the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. A recipient of the Gates Millennial Scholarship, Waln attended the Columbia College Chicago, where he received a BA in Audio Arts and Acoustics. Waln's awards include 3 Native American Music Awards, the National Center for American Indian and Enterprise Development 2014 Native American 40 Under 40, the 2014 Chicago Mayor's Award for Civic Engagement, and the 2016 3 Arts Grant for Chicago Artists. He has been featured in BuzzFeed, The Fader, Playboy, Vibe, NPR, ESPN, and MTV's Rebel Music Native America. Waln has written for various publications, including Decolonization, Indigeneity, Education, and Society, and The Guardian. Frank Waln travels the world telling his story through performance and doing workshops focusing on self-empowerment and expression of truth. So welcome, relatives. It's so great to be here in the space with all you. I've been a fan of the 3 of you since long before we ever spoke. So I'm just very honored and excited to share this space with each of you. So before Frank performs with us, I'm going to have everyone give a visual description of what they're wearing and our surroundings so that if we have any blind or visually impaired viewers, they have a better idea of what's going on. So I'll kick it off. So I'm wearing a black t-shirt. I have on a white, yellow, and black beaded medallion. You can't really see the medallion though, so it kind of looks like a necklace. I have on big, bright, chunky yellow earrings. I am a white coated native. That means I'm lighter in appearance. I have brown hair. It's kind of just at my shoulders, and I'm wearing black, sort of librarian style nerdy glasses. All right, so who wants to go next? Oh, and there's a blank white wall behind me. Frank, do you want to give your description?
Definitely, I'll go next. So I'm wearing a Lakota style of shirt called a ribbon shirt. It's actually handmade. It was a gift from my mother, made by her friend, but it's a kind of like a black dress up shirt design, but it's got a horse pattern sewed into it and shiny, almost silk-like ribbon fabric coming off of it. And the color, so the main shirt's black and it's got red, orange, yellow, and green in it. And those colors are also worked into the horse designs. And I'm wearing buffalo bone earrings in the shape of tiny buffaloes. I come from a horse people and a buffalo people, so I like to represent that whenever I perform. I got long hair, it's in a braid. Much like Jen, I'm on the lighter end of the skin spectrum. Behind me, I have I hung up a blanket that I got as a gift. It's a native blanket. It's not from Pendleton, but it's a Pendleton-like design, and it's got like tan sand color hues, and it's got a lot of really cool triangle and square pattern and designs on it. Too many to name.
Wonderful, thank you. Oh, and going forward, whenever we all speak, and I know I'm not always the best to remember this, but try to remember to say like, oh, this is Jen speaking now, so that way anyone who can't see us will know. Tony, would you like to go next with your description?
Sure. Tony Enos, greetings. Many blessings from the Chota Cherokee tribe. It's Tony. I have a red shirt on. I have a beaded medallion kind of hanging below the camera. It was actually a birthday gift, so hand beaded. It's deer tracks. So 2 deer tracks. Two braids. My scalp lock is braided into two braids, so the scalp lock, it's shaved halfway back to kind of, I call it my nugget. My head's a little pointed right there. So like that, and then just in two braids and a red bandana with a couple rhinestones on it, because why not? And I have it's not a Pendleton blanket, but it's a Pendleton like design throw over my chair because I hate the ugly print of this actual IKEA chair. And there's a painting my sister did for me for my birthday. Both of our favorite Broadway plays, Wicked. So she did the it's like the playbill or the front jacket of the soundtrack cover. So it has Glenda and Alphabet from Wicked on it.
Okay, Kera.
Kia ora koutou, it's Kera speaking. My name's Kera, I'm a Māori, also pretty white passing, especially exaggerated by the intense light I have right in front of my camera. But I have medium length brown hair with a bit of highlights going on. I'm wearing a black woolen dress, which comes down to my shoulders, as well as some glasses, which are sort of meant to be retro vintage sort of style, very round. I've got a bit of red lipstick on, bit of eyeliner. I'm also wearing some adornments, which I really love. So this is a pounamu, which is a greenstone necklace shaped in a koru or a round pattern. Pounamu is really significant. It only occurs in my tribal area, but it's quite similar to what other people might know as jade. So it's a hard green stone. I'm wearing some earrings, which I think are fabulous. They say love yourself. Love yourself. Oh, lost one. They have a red sparkly love heart because I also love glitter. And then another love heart, which is black and says love yourself. And they're designed by an Australian Aboriginal artist called House of Dizzy or Christy Dickinson. So I absolutely love those. And while I'm putting this on, I might describe my background to you all. So I'm in my office, which is a white room. I have a green big monstera plant because, you know, living that millennial life. On the wall behind me, there are some pictures, including some native birds from my country. I also have some woven kete, which are baskets hanging on the wall. And on the other side is my favorite piece. This is called ote. It's a bark cloth, which I made with a friend of mine who is my favorite New Zealand Māori artist, Nico Hinden. Myself and a bunch of other friends were taught by her how to make this bark cloth from a tree. It's a bit like tapa cloth or other, what's it called in Hawaii? It's a paper mulberry tree. And so that was beaten from a tree, which I was taught to do with her. So another cool tradition that we have in our culture that my friend is really reviving. So that's what I've got on the wall behind me. So kia ora.
Awesome, thank you. So thank you everyone for giving your visual descriptions. So we're gonna have Frank perform for us. He has a new album out of flute songs, and I just happened to hear them and hear about the story that inspired some of this music through Twitter and then on Spotify. And so I just really wanted to have Frank here with us today to share his story and his music. So Frank, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Sister Jen. Mitaku yapi o yate techa e machapelo naha iuha chante washtea. Hello, relatives. I just introduced myself in my language, Lakota. I said my Lakota name is Walks with the Young Nation, or alternatively Walks with the New Nation. And I welcome you all with an open heart and an open handshake. I'm a Suchungu Lakota hip hop artist, music producer, and storyteller from the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. And, you know, like Jen said, I'm going to share a song with you all I wrote on the flute, but I'm also going to share the story of where this song came from. And that's something that I like to do as an Indigenous artist. that I bring from home. You know, we often share where our songs come from, especially, you know, ceremony songs or even powwow songs. You know, every song has a story, and the story is often told before the song's performed. So each of my songs comes with a story. You know, like I said, I'm a storyteller. So this song was born out of a recently traumatic experience I went through. And this is actually a song I wrote to call my spirit back. So another thing that Lakota people do, and I was taught to do, is to call your spirit back daily. Even like when you come home from, you know, your journeys or travels, work, or you come in from outside, your spirit can be in different places. So it's important to call your spirit back 4 times. And so I wrote this song personally to call my spirit back after this experience I had. So I'll share that story with you all now. In February of this year, I had a stress-induced seizure, and it was, you know, it was kind of a freak accident. And my partner called 911. It was later in the evening when it happened. And 911, I'm based in Chicago. I live on the south side of Chicago. And so the ambulance came to get me. And every step of the way of me getting service from healthcare institutions in the city of Chicago, I will say they assumed the worst of me at every step. And when they arrived at my place, the first thing they thought, because of how I looked and where I lived and I was having a seizure, they thought I was smoking PCP, even though my partner was telling them, you know, I wasn't. She was trying to tell them, you know, what was going on. And I was taken to the University of Chicago Medical Center. My blood test came back. I wasn't smoking PCP like they had assumed. And another thing had happened soon after that wasn't supposed to happen. I came to in the hospital while I was intubated with a tube in my throat. And I had a lot of suffocation PTSD prior to that because I survived a scuba diving accident where I almost drowned in the ocean actually a year prior to that. So it was still pretty fresh. So I came to in the hospital, I was intubated, and I automatically felt like I was suffocating. And I was drugged up, and it was kind of like a dream, like a bad dream. But I just remember freaking out in the hospital bed. And that was the last thing I remember. You know, I was unconscious for a few days. But what had happened was when I came to and started panicking, the doctors marked me with combative disorder. And they had several men hold me down in the bed. They strapped me into a bed with locked restraints, and they pumped me full of sedatives, including a spinal tap, to try to figure out what had caused my seizure and to try to get me out of the combative state that they said I was in. And I came to on Sunday, a couple days later, and I was really loopy from the drugs, all the sedatives. I didn't know where I was or what had happened. My partner had to explain to me why my mom and my sister were sitting in Chicago, and you know, the last I knew, they were back home on my reservation. They drove out to see me. I had to be told what had happened to me. And shortly after I came to, I was moved from ICU to the regular floor, and they kicked my family out of the room, and a psychologist came into the room. And before this, luckily, my family had briefed me about another thing that had happened, of them assuming the worst at every step. So I have scars on my body and my chest from Lakota ceremonies we do. We have ceremonies where we offer flesh for prayer. And I've been participating in that for the last decade of my life. And these ceremonies actually used to be illegal, you know, as a lot of us know, for us to practice under US law until 78. So these ceremonies that I practice, you know, the people that taught me, the elders that taught me, had to do it when we were being persecuted for it. And so it's kind of, you know, it's kind of a thing we keep to ourselves. But I had the scars on my body from that. And when the hospital saw that, they assumed it was self-mutilation, despite my family telling them otherwise. And so when I came to, and the psychologist was in the room with me with his assistant, they kicked my family out. He started questioning me about the scars on my body. He started questioning me about my history of seeing a psychologist, because I have a history of struggling with depression, PTSD, anxiety for most of my life. It's something I struggle with daily, and actually led to the seizure. And so, and keep in mind, I was still really looped up from all the sedatives and drugs. So I wasn't even fully, you know, conscious. And he was questioning me about scars on my body, asking me if it was self-mutilation. He was questioning me about seeing a psychologist. He was questioning me about being depressed, about suicidal ideation. And I struggle with all those things, but fortunately my family had briefed me what they were trying, how they were trying to frame my condition, and, how they were trying to use all that to say I was an insane person. I came in an insane state, and they were going to try to send me to the psych ward. And the scars on my body was kind of like the last thing they were using, like, oh, he does self-mutilation. And so I kind of dodged all the questions, and I explained the scars on my body. Unfortunately, I did not get sent to the psych ward, but they allowed my family to come back in. Then the doctor came in, and the doctor then proceeded to tell me that I wasn't going to be allowed to go home. And the reason being that whenever you shoot that many sedatives and cause that much muscle trauma in a young person's body at one time, because from being strapped in the bed, when I came to, I had bruises all over my body. Like I felt like and looked like I'd been ran over by a truck. I could barely move. When they cause that much muscle trauma combined with that intense dosage of sedatives, it can cause a spike in an enzyme in our blood called the creatine kinase enzyme. They call it the CK enzyme. And normal levels, they told me, were between 300 and 500. And when I came to on Sunday, my levels were over 40,000, and it was damaging my liver and kidneys. So I basically had to stay in the hospital for a week and get flushed on IVs to undo the damage that the hospital had done to me when I came in to get treated for a seizure. So they couldn't really figure out what had caused the seizure. I seen a Chinese herbalist and some alternative medicine people after. That gave me some information that I trusted a little more. So the hospital couldn't even really figure out what had caused the seizure, and they had just caused all that damage to my body, including covering me in bruises and spiking the CK enzyme levels in my blood. So I was in the hospital for a week. It was one of the worst weeks of my life, and I've been through some traumatic things. But another thing I noticed was that I was the youngest person on my floor, and I was the only person that wasn't Black, because, like I said, I live on the south side of Chicago, and they took me to a hospital in the south side. And so, I just want to connect this to some history and maybe to some things that are going on currently. So, like I said, it used to be illegal for us to practice our ceremonies under U.S. law until 1978, until the Indian Religious Freedom Act. And in my home state of South Dakota, they would send my ancestors and my elders to insane asylums, to the psych ward, for practicing ceremony. They said we were devil worshippers. And in my state, there's rundown buildings that say insane asylum for Indians. So even though, we supposedly gained religious freedom in 78, it's 2020, and I was almost sent to a psych ward for doing ceremony as a Lakota person, just off of the ignorance and how they wouldn't, listen. And also connecting the dots with how when the pandemic hit, stats came out about the city of Chicago, over 75% of the deaths were in the south side of Chicago. And it really hit me because I was, this happened to me a couple weeks before the pandemic really hit. And the hospital almost killed me, and I went in for a seizure, So, I came out of that lucky. I was just grateful to be alive. I was grateful to be able to go home. And when I got home, like I said, I felt like I needed to call my spirit back. I felt like my spirit had left my body entirely. And that's another thing that Lakota people believe, is that your spirit can leave your body during times of trauma as well, even in pieces or fragments. And so I felt like my spirit was gone because I was unconscious for a couple of days, so I experienced a ton of violence while being unconscious. And I'm still healing from that in a lot of ways. But this song I'm about to perform for you is the song that was born out of that experience. This is titled the Calling Your Spirit Back song. And never have I ever, I've been writing songs for over majority of my life, and never have I had a song entirely already formed in my head. I got home from the hospital, and the first thing I did was I grabbed my flute and I stepped out on my back deck and I played this song entirely as it is. And I've never had that happen. I've always had to work on songs. You add pieces, you change pieces as you go, And I worked on songs for years, before. I've never had a song come to me just, you know, almost like a gift. And so I feel like it's a gift to be shared with people. So this is a song I wrote to call my spirit back. And this is for all of us who experienced trauma and violence, you know, for a ton of different reasons, and just being survivors of genocide and everything that we have to go through, you know, the things that we talked about to introduce this event. You know, I feel like our spirits can leave us sometimes. And so, you know, I also play this for all of us to call our spirits back. Everyone watching, everyone listening, whatever you call yourself, you know, even if it isn't your government given name, whatever you call your spirit, maybe as you're listening to this, call it back 4 times. Tanka, thank you all very much from the bottom of my heart for listening to my story. And thank you, Jen, for inviting me to be a part of this wonderful event.
Guess it helps if I unmute myself. So Wado, thank you, Frank, for sharing such a really personal story and such a beautiful song. I know that far too many of our Black, Indigenous, and people of color and our disabled and ill people suffer discrimination in healthcare settings, as well as our, you know, our Two-Spirit and our LGBTQ people. I know I myself have, unfortunately, far too many stories that I could personally share. And so I always appreciate when other people find that ability to stand up and speak out. It's really important, so thank you. So we're gonna take a 1-minute break of silence for everyone, and then we'll be back with Tony. Next up, we have Tony Enos. He's going to talk to us about his 4th self-written, self-produced album that's out and the music video Positive. So Tony, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about the music video and the album and set us up for that before we play the video.
Tony Enos, greetings. My name is Tony Enos. Many blessings from the Cherokee tribe. Thank you, Jen, for having me, and Ski Bilame to my brother Frank for your words, for your kindness, for your warrior spirit, and for sharing your story and your medicine. The album is called Positive. It's my 4th studio album. Been recording and releasing music professionally since 2008, and I've been HIV positive since 2006. And I always knew that, you know, that it would be brought to my spirit when it was time to be public about it, or share, so to speak. And originally this album was supposed to be called something completely different and a completely different concept, and we got to talking about it, and I just felt like it was time. And I think the catalyst for that, I'll try and be brief, the last summer, I think it was July, I performed at the United States Conference on AIDS. It was an amazing experience, and an amazing conference, an amazing affirming space for people living with HIV. And here I am in this amazing affirming space for people living with HIV, and I chose to stay in the closet about it. And I just caused myself so much more anxiety than that was necessary, like even on stage. Like, it was just kind of it wasn't the smartest decision I've ever made. And I couldn't even sort of even commune with people or be like, hey, me too, or hey, I've been there, you know, things are going to get better, this too shall pass. And so when it was all over, I worked so hard just to, you know, get through it all. And again, it was an amazing experience, but I thought to myself, I'll never do this again. Like, I'll never keep myself in the closet when I'm in an affirming space like this. And maybe it even could have been of help, or it could have been good medicine in some way. So I just felt like that kind of set the timer, you know, on when it was time to come out about it. And the song came to me eventually. That's really what I was coming home from the grocery store one night, and I just thought, well, you know, if I'm going to do an album called Positive, I guess I better write a song called Positive. And just got to thinking about you know, what the past 14 years living with HIV has been like. And, you know, my faith has gotten me through so much. Music has gotten me through so much. My family has gotten me through so much. Love has gotten me through so much. So that's sort of like the you know, as we say in our ways, the good medicine that I tried to pour into the song. And I guess as far as the video is concerned, there's certain things that I wanted to normalize. I think with this album overall, education and normalizing certain things and certain dialogues were important to me. When I first got diagnosed, there was my house at the time, we had a floor-to-ceiling mirror when you stepped out of the bath, when you stepped out of the shower. And I just wanted to get a bat and bust every mirror. And I couldn't stomach the sight of myself in the mirror, maybe for like the first 2 years of living with HIV. It was just like this unclean thing was staring back at me. And I think it was at that hour that I sort of did the most battling of my demons, I think. And so there's a particular scene in the video where I'm in the bathtub, and there's sort of like a suicidal ideation. And I didn't want to glamorize suicide or suicidal ideation, but what I wanted to normalize was the feeling of sometimes, and part of my language, shitty things happen, and it's a shitty feeling. And so I don't want anyone to think that they're crazy for feeling a certain way, or for feeling bad. Like, yeah, like, getting diagnosed with HIV is not the most fun thing in the world. It's a shitty thing. It's a shitty feeling. But the point is, you know, this too shall pass, and the better days were ahead. But there was definitely a certain amount of normalizing certain things and thoughts and feelings, I think, that come along. And, you know, not just with HIV, I think trauma in general, when you have a traumatic experience, it can turn your world upside down. But again, it's only temporary, and better days are always ahead. So that's the overall message of the album and the video.
Wado, thank you, Tony. We're gonna show the music video now.
Even in the dark, even in the night, I always knew the sun would rise. So I just held tight into my dream. I believed all the way I couldn't believe. Even in the now, when things get rough, I always know the sun's gonna come. And I'm a faith to move mountains. And yes, I'm absolutely positive. living clearly, and my heart's been shattered just like that. I've been scared and I've been down, afraid that it's gonna take me out. My darkest hour was my finest hour. Even in the dark, even in the night, I always knew the sun would rise. So I just held tight to my dreams. I believed harder when I couldn't believe. Even in the now, when things get rough, I always know the sun gon' come up. And I'm a faith to move mountains. And yes, I'm absolutely positive. I can't promise it'll be perfect. I can only promise it'll be worth it. Even in the dark, even in the night, I always knew the sun would rise. So I just held tighter to my dreams. I believed harder when I couldn't believe. Even in the now, when things get rough, I always know the sun gon' come. And I'm a faith to move mountains. And yes, I'm absolutely. Even in the dark, even in the night, I always knew the sun would rise. So I just held tighter to my dreams. I believed harder when I couldn't believe. Even in the now, when things get rough, I always know the sun gon' come. And I'm a faith to move mountains. And yes, I'm absolutely positive. Yes, I'm absolutely positive.
One of the most important things is to remember, if you're newly diagnosed with HIV, if you've had HIV for a while, and from time to time it is a struggle, but to reach out, for us to support each other, remind each other we're not alone. I do want to put everyone on to what's kind of been a second family for me, and kind of like my little res in New York City. And while I was living in New York City was the American Indian Community House. The American Indian Community House in New York, 51 years old, 51 years serving the Native American First Nations indigenous community of New York City. And there's a lot of HIV resources that I would encourage people to check out. So just in terms of resources, AICH.org, the Healthy Elders Network, which is an initiative for healthy aging for elders living with HIV. So that is AICH.org, or if my dyslexia is kicking in, the other way around, AICHN.org. Also, check out cdc.gov/HIV. There are good resources on it from time to time. And also IHS, Indian Health Services, does have a lot of great information regarding HIV, culturally competent HIV information, I should say, for us, for Native American First Nations, indigenous individuals. So reach out, you're not alone, this too shall pass. And I think even in terms of just where we are as a human family right now, better days are ahead. So keep on keeping on.
All right, Wado, thank you. So, Kera, I know that you don't have a video or anything to share with us today, but I'd love to hear more about the work that you are doing in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, and working with Maori folks in the disability community there. You know, what does that look like for you?
Sure. So kia ora koutou, ko Kera Sherwood-O'Regan aho. My name's Kera. I might just introduce myself in our traditional way and then give a little bit of a summary before I answer that wonderful question. Thank you, Jen. So kia ora koutou, ko auraki te mauka, ko waitaki te awa, ko tahu pōtaki te tupuna, ko uenoku te whare kei moiraki, ko tahu pōtaki te whare kei awarua, Ko ka tira ki amo, ka ti waiwai, ko ka tiro hiki hiki ka ka rakataka e mihi ana ki a koutou, ko Kera Sherwood-O'Regan aho. So kia ora everyone. As I've introduced, my name's Kera. That's my traditional way of introducing myself. We call it a pepeha. And I think within Te Ao Māori, within the Māori world, we share this way because it acknowledges our relationships with our non-human relatives as well. So I introduced that Aoraki as my mountain, Waitaki is my awa, and that really connects to, I think the spaces and the places that my ancestors have come from and which are really significant for me. And I think also particularly drive my art and the sort of work that I do in art and in activism across my life, really. So I think essentially what I wanted to share with today was not a video as such yet, because it's a project that's still in development, but essentially my work at Activate, which is a social impact creative agency that I run with my partner. We're Indigenous, myself and many of our other collaborators are Indigenous as well, and disabled led. And essentially our work really focuses on how we look at narratives and stories and portrayals of Indigenous communities, of disabled communities, of queer communities as well. So Takatapui, queer representing too. So that's essentially a space for me that has been really validating in my identity as an Indigenous and disabled woman. It probably helps to know that I haven't always been in this arts background, so I haven't had the same maybe experiences or the same sort of creative process as our other fantastic relatives who have been sharing today. But I actually came from a weird background in politics and doing political science and anthropology, and basically just wanting to figure out how I could be a professional activist, basically. And for some reason, I thought it would be a really good idea to go to medical school. So I started doing that. That was a bit of a journey for a good number of years. And one of the things, or one of the themes that really came through all of these experiences, through my political activism, through my studies in medicine, and particularly focusing on hauora Māori or Māori health, was a big theme around consent, a big theme around consent and trauma, I think. I'll say that my experience studying within a Western medical program was pretty racist, pretty ableist, and myself as someone living with fibromyalgia, PTSD, also have experiences of anxiety and depression as well. It was just a really invalidating space, and also, experienced quite a bit of medical trauma myself. And so through this, that's really made me think a lot around consent in all of these spaces. And now being in this art space of, mostly making films, but also looking at other mixed media. So doing podcasts, I'm a writer as well. So I do a lot of writing, mostly just my opinions, mostly just trying to get people to pay me to write opinions about decolonization and racism, basically. But through all of this, consent and trauma is such a big thing. And so what I really love about the work that I'm very privileged to be able to do now is that we're really thinking around storytelling in a holistic sense, and how, how we can tell stories with our communities at the center, and with our communities as, the ones holding the pen, or really having agency and sharing their narratives, and what the implications of narratives and framing that we use in that storytelling and in that, media production and those arts productions, what are the implications of that? Because I think so often we have a lot of stories that are told about us as Indigenous people, as disabled people, that don't necessarily represent our lived experience. They don't necessarily represent who we are. It's a lot of assumptions, especially just, want to send aroha to you, Frank, for what you shared in terms of those assumptions that were made about you. And I think that's, really unfortunately something that is so common for so many of our Indigenous and disabled relatives, in the medical space, is that there are stories that health professionals have about our communities that impact the kind of care that they give us, and it's killing us. It's really harming our communities, it's killing our people, it is contributing to our people not being able to really you know, live the lives that we want to live, and that we know that our ancestors and our children and generations to come really need us to live as Indigenous people. So at the moment, I'd say that a lot of my practice really explores concepts around story sovereignty. So what it means to own our own stories, what it means to create our own stories and be the people who are actually having the power in that situation, especially when we have a media context where so much of it is quite extractivist. And that is rooted in those, you know, capitalist, colonialist, you know, racist, sexist, homophobic, heterosexist kind of big power dynamics. And so at the moment, I've been really privileged to work with a bunch of amazing wahine Māori, so other Māori women, on a project around decolonizing mental health, which has been really generously funded by the Mental Health Foundation of Aotearoa New Zealand and Like Minds Like Mine. And what we're really exploring with that is, you know, how do we collectively create and share these stories? What does sovereignty look like in an individual sense when we're sharing our own stories, but also what does it look like as a collective? Because we know that many of the stories we have ourselves are also stories that are shared by our communities. And the stories that we share and the way that we share them also have an impact on our communities. So, you know, even just earlier when I was introducing myself and talking about my mountain, you know, that's a mountain of many other people, many of my other relatives as well. And so if I ever want to share a story relating to that, it's really important to me and really important as an Indigenous storyteller to recognize that that's not mine to share in isolation, that exists in relationship with other people. And so that's what we're exploring, you know, sharing stories, how we share that, and particularly how we navigate consent on an ongoing basis. Because I think in a lot of media practice and arts practice, at least in New Zealand, a lot of it really conceptualizes consent as this like kind of legal requirement that is just like a tick box. So, you know, if we're going in to make a film about a community, you know, and we're wanting to talk about our community's experience, then all of the people who are, you know, sharing stories are often considered, you know, talent. You know, it's like just to think of people as talent when they're sharing so much of themselves. And there's this expectation that they'll get this, you know, kind of consent form and then, you know, read all of this legal stuff, which includes things saying that we, you know, you give us the right to exploit your image and things like this. And then there's just this action of ticking and signing this form. And that means that somehow the story has transferred ownership into, you know, a production company or a photographer or a filmmaker or an artist who is, you know, depicting that person and that person's story. And for us, it's really important to actually think about consent in the context of a relationship. You know, what does it mean to actually really see that person and see that person's story and to hold space for them to tell that story however they need to? What does it mean to have an ongoing relationship with them beyond, you know, just making a piece of media, you know? And so what are the kinds of practices that we can embed in that? And so this wānanga, this meeting that we're all having to produce this Decolonizing Mental Health series is something I'm really looking forward to. We're basically going to get together in a really nice house in a nice like Airbnb and have 3 days of getting to know each other, getting to share story about mental health, but sharing it in a way that is not through this colonial gaze, where we can just, you know, share our experiences, how it connects to our culture, how our culture and reconnecting to our cultural practices has been really important for, you know, supporting our own well-being, and doing that in a way where we can share story as a collective, you know, rather than coming in and asking people to share their trauma so that we can, you know, get funding or share a movie or make a podcast or whatever that end piece of media is. So that's something that I'm working on at the moment that I wanted to share with people. because I just think that our media space could learn so much from, you know, people like yourselves, from our Indigenous and disabled communities in terms of how we relate to each other, how we see each other, how we, you know, make an effort to be in good relationship with each other and recognize that we are just one part of, you know, a wider ecosystem, and that it is, you know, part of a wider ecosystem, which is just a sea of stories. There are so many stories around us that connect us, that can, you know, shape the changes that we want to see in the world, and how we can really think about ourselves as just part of this collective, and really growing that capacity for storytelling in a really authentic way, where everybody is respected, honored, where their sovereignty is affirmed, where their rights are affirmed, and where we can do good shit. So kia ora.
Wado, thank you. You know, it's interesting, just all of us have such varied backgrounds, yet we all still are traditional storytellers in our own ways through our own mediums. And I think it's a really beautiful thing. It's a way to, I think, sort of have a sense of self-empowerment, to empower our communities, to try to process our trauma in a healthier way, and, you know, connect with the ancestors. I think it's so great what all three of you are doing in your lives, and the way you're helping your people in the 7 generations to come. I think it's really wonderful. So thank you for sharing that with us all. So we're going to have another 1-minute break of silence, and then we'll come back with some Q&A with Tony, Kara, and Frank. All right, so welcome back, everyone. We're gonna have a little Q&A, a little conversation amongst the 4 of us now. So I wanna start out just sort of a guiding question for you all. So what are some of the barriers that disabled and ill Indigenous people in the arts face, and how do we overcome them?
Well, I'll just kind of start off and say, you know, from my perspective of not only being an artist, but also, you know, having scored some grants and stuff like that for Indigenous artists, and seeing even the parameters that they present our opportunities through. None of it is ever culturally competent, and a lot of it is always ignorant of our history. You know, I've always just been in a position of not only having to explain, you know, the things we carry every day, like our illnesses and our mental health struggles and stuff like that, but having to explain why we have those, you know, because everything that I carry, I see is connected to our history of genocide and settler colonialism, and even my personal traumas of, you know, abuse and violence, even from my own family members. I could connect all of that to our history of violence, you know, almost direct lines I can draw. And so for me, one of the biggest hurdles is ignorance. And I think that played into my story, just ignorance about settler colonialism, and how everything we're doing is built on that foundation, and every lens that they view us through is, you know, colonial, and kind of just needing to do away with all that and start from scratch. And that's why I like what, you know, Kera was talking about, of, you know, kind of starting from the community as a source, Indigenous communities as a source. So that's just something that I experienced, you know, ignorance and lack of culturally competent opportunities.
Hey, it's Tony speaking again. And just to sort of, I co-sign on everything that my brother Frank just said. I think there's such a detrimental lack of awareness and education as it pertains to our intergenerational trauma as Native American, First Nations, Indigenous people, and then how that filters through the healthcare system, through the quality of care that we get or don't get. From my own, you know, I can only speak for myself. it's interesting to see, you know, I've been in a doctor's office before, a healthcare provider's office before, where my beard was kind of heavy like this, and I'm in a hoodie and a ball cap and sweats, and just sort of how they spoke to me, almost like a child, you know. And I have a 14-year public health background also. I've been an HIV counselor, tester, case manager, and community educator, which of course they don't know. And so which just all the more you shouldn't make assumptions about people or speak down to people, but they would speak to me like I was a child, and I was like, I ain't coming back here. This is a one and done. I think too, as it pertains to HIV and directly, and one of the reasons I kept it a secret so long was I was afraid of not working. I was afraid of tour insurance companies not wanting to insure an artist living with HIV, then making assumptions about what my abilities were. Can I tour? Can I perform, you know, 2 shows a night, 6 days a week, and be healthy and all of those kinds of things. I also think there's a lack of communication there. We live in such a capitalist society, and unfortunately, the music business and the institution of the business and entertainment business, not a lot of dialoguing is happening. And so if you do have that concern, if that is a legitimate concern before you hire an HIV or an artist living with HIV, can we at least have a discussion? Like, what do you need to stay healthy? Is there anything that I could provide, that we can provide as a company, you know, as a support system for you to stay healthy while you're touring, this, that, and the third? So there's a lot of language and dialoguing and conversations that are not happening in the entertainment world and business and music industry, unfortunately. And that's something we need to work toward changing. So I think giving people language is important also.
Kia ora, Kera speaking now. Yeah, absolutely. I just really want to tautoko support what my relatives from Turtle Island have been sharing. I think, definitely agree with what has been said already. And I think particularly some of the mentions you know, around what do we need as Indigenous and as disabled people. Like, that's such an important conversation that is so missing from many of the funders, many of the other collaborators that we might need to work with to have, you know, artworks or projects made. And I think a really big thing that goes hand in hand with that is also, you know, if we're looking at the issue of funding, like, I hate to always be the one who's like funding, because I hate capitalism. I think capitalism is trash and ruins everything and has, you know, massively undermined our creative abilities. But, you know, I guess I do have to accept that, you know, I'm trying to create work and I'm trying to create art and film and stories in a world or in a system and a society that is inherently capitalist. And that also means that, like, our labor and our work, like, that needs to be, you know, that needs to be compensated. And I think, particularly speaking from, you know, the context in Aotearoa, I don't know what it's like everywhere else, though I have my suspicions, funding and expectation of free labor and work for exposure is huge. And I think it's such a big thing for our Indigenous and disabled communities as well, because we might not have had the same pathways into arts. You know, it might not be that we've all gone to art school or that we've all, you know, got a degree in film or something like that. You know, we've come from activist backgrounds or we've come from other backgrounds. I mean, my background is still incredibly privileged. So I've found it, you know, I haven't had too much of a struggle to kind of segue into this, but that's because I have a huge amount of academic privilege. But for a lot of people, you know, you're not able to get projects without doing this free work for exposure. And that is so much harder for people who, are Indigenous, are disabled. You know, we have high health costs. We're also, you know, trying to contribute to our families, trying to contribute to our whānau, trying to contribute to our iwi, our tribes, and our, you know, wider communities. And you can't do that when you're not getting paid to survive. And I think that what goes hand in hand with that is around what are the sorts of things that do actually get funded, because I would say that you know, there are massive colonialist and extractivist power dynamics which really influence which projects get funded, which projects get made. And oftentimes what I see here is that this very often means that we end up prioritizing, you know, particular types of stories or particular types of work to be made. And I feel like very often that means the sorts of things that are being prioritized are like inspiration or trauma porn, where our people are expected to milk our trauma for everybody else's consumption, so they can say, oh wow, I just watched this really beautiful thing of this like Indigenous woman, like, you know, going through all of this hardship, and oh, you're just so strong, and it's so like your culture is so beautiful. And it's like, well, that doesn't really help a lot of our people, that doesn't help our artists, that doesn't help our communities to change the narratives about our communities. And so oftentimes, you know, there is this expectation of, you know, milking our trauma or milking our culture and having quite a tokenistic representation of ourselves, which then means that there are only limited kinds of roles that we're perceived as being able to play. You know, particularly speaking as an Indigenous wahine, as an Indigenous woman, I see so many of my fellow Māori wahine who are doing so much, and they're expected to play this role of like the suffering Indigenous woman who just gets everything done for everybody else. Or if you're a disabled person, or both, you know, you're expected to perform as either, you know, the lowly person who is having so much struggle and having so much trauma, or you're expected to be the super crip that has to like beat all of the things so that everybody else can recognize you as a full human being because you're doing all of this, you know, inspirational stuff. And so I think, you know, when it comes to funding, so much of that is built into that system, which makes it really hard for our people to access. It makes it really hard for our people to tell the stories that we actually know we need to be telling. And it also makes it really hard to, you know, bring in new talents and new artists, which I think is another challenge, especially in New Zealand, because, you know, our Indigenous and disabled community is so small, and it's really, really hard to, you know, to try and grow people and to try and support people when you're like, well, the only roles we can give you are, you know, not paid very well, or, you know, we can encourage you to take on some projects for exposure, or there's just not funding for the stories that you want to tell, or you're going to be pushed into telling a story that, you know, is quite extractivist. And so I just think that, yeah, that's probably like a massive, like big web of things that all compound each other. But I just think that so much of this could be addressed if we actually had funding for arts and funding for storytelling that, in an effort to be culturally competent, wasn't really prescriptive, but actually was just like, you know what, you making art and making work and sharing stories as Indigenous and disabled people, that is valid and that is worthy of funding, whatever, you know, like that there shouldn't be so many strings attached to it.
Yeah, Wado, thank you. This is Jen speaking. I was sitting here taking notes, so I was listening to all of you because my mind was just like pinging all over, thinking of all these experiences that I've had in my life. All the years that I felt like I had to hide my illnesses and my disabilities. It really wasn't until they reached the point that there just was no hiding it anymore that I really like publicly said, hey, I'm disabled. I have chronic illnesses. I suffer from chronic pain. And I worry. It's part of the reason I'm so open and out about everything that I am, about being bisexual, two-spirit, all these things, because I know what it's like to have to hide that stuff, and I don't want to do it. And representation is important, but then sometimes I feel like I get tokenized in this work, and that being asked to come in and like do work for free, like I'm supposed to be grateful that you want to hear what I have to say. And it's like, well, I'm glad you want to hear what I have to say, but if you're going to pay that white cis man over there, you better pay me at least the same. Honestly, you should pay me more. But yeah, it's frustrating. And I've been thinking about this a lot as a journalist and a writer, just the grant system, the fellowships. And, you know, even if you can get into that world and you manage to navigate it, then, you know, I can't speak to New Zealand or anywhere else, but I can say in the United States, as somebody who's on SSDI, which is one of our disability federal programs, like, you know, and that's how I get my health insurance, my home health aid, everything. Like, I will never make enough to afford all of these things. You know, disability accessible housing, all this stuff is expensive. It's so expensive. I'll never make enough to afford it. So then I have to stay within like a poverty range to get the services from the government. But then the way those services work, that poverty range and the payments and things, I can't ever really ask for what I'm worth when I'm asking for payment, you know? So it's like the system just keeps us all down in so many ways and keeps us from being able to do this work and be paid well and be respected and be cared for. Man, we have so much work to do. So on that note, now that we've all kind of like gone over some of these huge barriers and things, you know, what do we think we can do to overcome this? Because obviously this isn't just like one little thing. This is systematic, you know, and it's not just happening in one country. This is happening to our Indigenous and, you know, disabled people all over the world. So what do we do?
That's a really great question. I feel like if we all had the answer, we would be out fixing it right now and changing it and doing it. But we could all throw ideas out and maybe things that work from where we're coming from. But you know, I think, and this is a privilege to even be able to do this. But one of the things I've been doing, you know, recently collectively with other Indigenous artists who are kind of in the same boat and space I'm in, is collectively putting our power together, you know, even in the capitalist world, and whatever power we have, and trying to create opportunities for Native people coming after us that we didn't have, you know, like, okay, one of the things we did was we created a scholarship for Native people who wanted to be artists, you know, and because when we were graduating from high school, you know, there were no scholarships for Native artists when I was graduating. And if there were, you know, I didn't know about them, coming from a small, poor reservation in South Dakota. And so, you know, things like that. And just some, more recently, I'm seeing Native organizations, Native founded, Native ran, who are really trying to, I think, reframe the way funding is distributed to Native artists. And you know, it's always great when you can get funding from a place and they're like, you know, no strings attached. If you need to use it for rent, you know, whatever you need to use it for, use it. And so, you know, I've started to see some organizations like that emerge. And, you know, it's not big chunks of money yet, but just starting to see Native-led orgs made by Native people for Native artists, trying to figure that out, you know. And I think the answer is having these conversations and figuring it out together, because no one's going to come in and do it for us. And we see that now, you know. So I think things like this, even this event, you know, all these little efforts will compound, and the next generations, I know, will be greater than we.
You know, Jen, you had said the magic word, which is, it is so systemic and so systematic. And I think that's so prevalent, speaking from an artist perspective. I think when you go into a museum, you know, and I won't name any in particular, but go into a museum and go see what is considered fine art, and then where the Native art is in the folk art section. And it's demoted and it's minimized because maybe you as a Native artist didn't pay NYU however many thousands of dollars to go and say, now I have this piece of paper, you know, from an institution that's part of the business of America and the establishment of America, and now you can call my art fine art. It's not just folk art anymore. So there's a systematic value system that's being placed on Indigenous art and the art process and artists. And it is very much systematic and systemic. It's erasure, it's genocide, it's oppression. One thing I will say, I think that we can do better in our Native, First Nations, and Indigenous communities is organize better, I am a mixed race Native. Among my races as being 25% African American. And I have experienced a lot of lateral violence in our communities. There's kind of this unspoken thing where it's like, it's okay to be white and Native, but if you're Black and Native, you're just too abominable to live and to be acknowledged. But I say all that to say, one of the most successful movements right now is the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, look at the coverage and the attention and the sort of push and pull that they're able to do right now because of the organizing. They're not carding folks. They're not fighting over blood quantum. They're not fighting over, you know what I mean? Kind of sort of the way we fight amongst ourselves as Native people. That needs to change, because I think as we hold back each other, we're holding back progress at the same time. So organizing better, and to Frank's point also, you know, creating better opportunities than perhaps we grew up having. We all know access to everything is again, here on Turtle Island, access is an issue right now, period. Yeah, I think those are some things that we maybe can think about as we move into where to start.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I'm just getting stuck in a cycle of being like tautoko, like support, because like everything that is coming out of both of your mouths, I'm just like, yes, all of this. So I don't know how much to add or how much I can really add that's different, but maybe just to riff off it a little bit in terms of the context, you know, that I've seen in Aotearoa in New Zealand, and maybe some like direct asks that I would have, you know, if anybody's watching this and is a funder or is working with an organization who has resources and things. Some of the things that I'd really like to see to help overcome these barriers and these challenges that our people are facing and shouldn't have to face is like funding. So funding that is earmarked for these sorts of projects, so that we don't have to compete with big white abled organizations who have lots of resources, you know, lots of those people who have had those fancy degrees that look really good on funding applications, and who can produce at really low cost with less engagement with their community and at faster timelines. The other thing I would say is funding that is not tied to specific outcomes. And like, I get the importance of like funders needing to see, you know, that their money isn't just being frittered away or things like that. But I think the current models of funding that I've seen make it really impossible to do work that is genuinely co-designed or genuinely designed in wānanga, so our spaces of collective learning, sharing, and decision-making. And so if there are already those prescribed outcomes, then it means that you can't actually do that process properly. You're always tied to going into the funding application with a particular agenda, with a particular narrative, and there's no room to be challenged or to have that contributed to or shaped by the community that you're working with. So I would say, you know, keeping that really broad is important. And it's also really important because it's so hard to see some of the outcomes of the work that is going to be most transformational. You know, the work that is most transformational, in my view, is the stuff that is, you know, challenging capitalism, that's challenging colonialism and patriarchy and ableism and all of these structures of oppression, which are keeping our people in these positions. And that looks like many different things. Like, I'm not saying that people have to have an artwork or a video that's like, capitalism sucks. Like, there are lots of different ways that you can do that. But I think making sure that there is space to recognize that the outcomes of the most transformational work will not be easy to sum up in a report, you know, the week after you deliver. You know, that's the stuff that takes time. It takes time to engage with community who are witnessing or participating or sharing in that work. And it takes time to see the outcomes of how the narratives about our people have changed because of this different representation. Sorry, I've got a shopping list now that I really want to get across in case there are any big like funders watching. But one of the other things to me is timelines. You know, in a lot of those funding applications, there are really tight timelines, or they prioritize people who can turn around projects really fast. That really disadvantages our chronically ill communities, our disabled community, and our Indigenous communities, as you know, in an intersectional way, but particularly, you know, within our Indigenous communities as well. Like, that doesn't account for so many of the responsibilities that we have, where white artists have the privilege of just saying, oh, I'm going to create this art because this is what I want to do, when we're having to be accountable to our communities, and we're probably having to do a lot more work that is not recognized. Workshops, training that's led by and for us, because we have so many experts who are telling us how to do art, how to tell story, and they don't have experience in our communities. Oftentimes their framing is really crap, and it ends up, you know, contributing to people being forced to tell their stories in a way that is really suitable for the colonial and the abled gaze. And one of the other things I'd say is that within our Māori culture, we have this concept of like tuakana and taina, which is like roughly having like an older sibling and a younger sibling. And so it's like this responsibility where, you know, in a relationship, you know, if I'm someone's tuakana, then I'm expected to provide some of that mentoring, some of that support to help those younger ones develop and, you know, interact in a safe way, because there's a lot of cultural unsafety that particularly our young people get put into when they're having to try and access these opportunities. It's just like, we're going to throw you out there and you're going to have to talk about being Indigenous, but there's no good cultural support wrapped around it. And so as a tuakana, it's my responsibility to kind of try and bring people into these spaces. But I'm also a taina. I'm also a younger sibling in a learning role in lots of spaces. And in that space, it's my role to really listen, to learn, to try and take the opportunities that my tuakana or my elders are providing me. And I think that's something that can really be integrated into a lot of work, and which we do by, you know, oftentimes we'll have rangatahi or young who have, say, come and been quote unquote talent in a video, and they really want to get into filmmaking. And so we'll say, okay, well, next time, why don't you come back and you can have a job, you know, being a, you know, helping out behind the scenes, you know, and find roles for them. And we find, you know, try and find other people that we can connect them up to. And so I think having that sort of intergenerational role, and having like funding and structures that support our artists and our creators to do that and see that as being a core part of the work, I think that would make a really big difference too.
Yeah, once again, my brain just pinging in multiple directions listening to you all. Frank, I think I'm quite, I'd say I'm like probably at least a decade older than you. But I remember when I was looking to go to college, I actually went to school originally to study music, and I called my tribe and I called all these scholarships and things. And this was way before, you know, we had anything other than dial-up internet. So it took some legwork to get this information, and the response I always got is, we don't need Indians studying music. We need doctors, we need lawyers, we need engineers. And I understand we do need that, but we need musicians, we need writers, we need journalists, we need filmmakers. You know, we need to encourage and support our traditional storytellers. And I think that money is a big factor in that. But the whole structure, yeah, the whole structure's got to change. And so one of the things we at Crushing Colonialism are doing, you know, all of these experiences that have been discussed here and then some were what led me to start Crushing Colonialism. It was knowing about how we're constantly expected to work for free, we're tokenized. I know what it's like, you know, only hearing from certain editors once or twice a year, and it's always the same damn story. I will not write another story about Columbus Day. I refuse to do it. I won't do it. You know, I can write about a lot of other things. It doesn't just have to be about that guy, you know. So that's part of why I started Crushing Colonialism. It's like, how do we find agents? How do we find, you know, attorneys that are versed in tribal law and in arts and journalism law and things and can do contracts with us. Like there's so many supports we need. And there are a lot of amazing Indigenous organizations out there, but I always felt like there was something a little lacking. And so that's where Crushing Colonialism came from. We pay everyone. We unfortunately don't have the kind of money to pay what people deserve, but we pay everyone who is on any of our events. Disability accessibility, we always build that into our budget for events. And that is something that Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities have got to get on board with. You have to start having accessibility, and accessibility means more than just a wheelchair entrance. It's big, it's vast. You need to talk with disabled people about how to have accessibility in your work. So before we say goodbye, I'd like to just ask you all one question, and I'm throwing it to you on the fly, but when, you know, we'll say 7 generations from now, when we've all walked on with the ancestors, what is one big change we hope that will happen for our future generations? Like what is that hope? What is that inspiration that we have, and how do we do that? And I know that's a big question to try to answer very quickly, but.
No more settlers. Just kidding. No, I would say for me, just, you know, that is a big question. That's a loaded question. We could all probably write albums and dissertations and books on that. But for me, one of the big pieces is getting land back, you know, and having access to land for coming generations of all walks of life. Because I think, you know, a lot of us have been displaced and disconnected from our land. And I was born and raised on a reservation on part of my people's homeland. But now, you know, I live in a city, a big city. I've lived here for over a decade, and being disconnected from land is a big issue for me and a lot of Native people that live here too. You know, a lot of Native communities, this was a relocation center, are struggling to find access to land and try to just, you know, connect with our own land. And so I think a big thing for me would be land back to Indigenous communities, you know, in any sort of way or fashion. You know, we've been stewarding the land for hundreds of thousands of years. We've seen what happened when other people, settlers, come in and take over. And I think it's high time we give the land back to the original stewards globally, all over the world.
I think when I think about that 7th generation, I would like for them to have been children who didn't have to recover from childhood. I would like for there not to be, you know, I get it, like birth is traumatic, right? And like trauma is part of life. Like I get that, but there's so much unnecessary trauma at this point. And I think it also points the finger back at us and the present and moving forward to take accountability for our own healing and for the kind of people that we are. And I think even when we look at the current socio-political landscape and at who is kind of arriving at accountability and being part of the solution and who isn't, and who is just sort of perpetuating further trauma on, it's almost like they're stacking the odds against the 7th generation. So I would love to see us take more accountability for our own healing and for manifesting healing modalities for the generations to come, so that that 7th generation grows up to be at least if not a generation that doesn't have to recover from trauma, a generation that has access to tools to heal from trauma better than we have, and better than the grandmothers and grandfathers and our ancestors have.
Kia ora, Kera speaking. Yeah, again, absolutely agree on both counts. I think what was in my mind was, hashtag land back, sovereignty in all its forms. So I think around, you know, if I'm thinking 7 generations in the future, I would really like to see, you know, my mokopuna or my descendants you know, being able to live on their own land, on the land of our ancestors as well, if that's what they choose to do. I'd probably like to see New Zealand not exist as a colonial state. That might be wishful thinking, but I hope that we can get there. I think part of that is recognizing the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples in the ways that we inherently know, not through this Western kind of concept of sovereignty as well. So, you know, our different tribes being able to exercise their tino rangatiratanga, their sovereignty, you know, over our lands, interact with other iwi, other tribes, like on that equal sort of playing field. I think I would like to see, you know, our mokopuna, our descendants, have sovereignty over their own bodies fully. So in terms of bodies being accepted, you know, disabled bodies, fat bodies, Indigenous bodies, queer bodies, like just to not have this policing of our bodies all of the time. I think I'd like to see our descendants, our mokopuna, having sovereignty over their stories and feeling really proud of where they've come from, feeling like that they can own their Indigenous whakapapa or their Indigenous heritage. And also I think part of that, you know, as somebody who has mixed heritage as well, is owning our Pākehā, or our, you know, in my case, you know, New Zealand European or like settler genealogy as well, being able to reconcile those things together, and essentially to have done that healing, or to have hopefully not had to go through that healing, so that they can be proud of everything that makes them them, that they can be proud of what they've done in their lives and their stories, and they feel that they can share those in a way that is mana enhancing, so affirming of their innate worth as human beings. I think so, having story sovereignty, having body sovereignty, having land sovereignty, and the big thing that kind of drives me towards as well is probably one of my pet topics around climate change. Like, I would really like to see, you know, our mokopuna, our descendants, being on a livable planet where we have not, you know, where previous generations have been accountable, have taken responsibility, and in large part, I would say, have learned from Indigenous communities who have the knowledge, who have the solutions to be able to get us out of this climate crisis. I think that this all goes hand in hand. You know, I think ableism, I think racism, like those are functions of colonization, they're functions of capitalism, and that's the same thing as the climate crisis. You know, if we can decolonize, that to me is a solution for all of the above. And so I'd really like to see us doing that deep work and not being scared of doing that deep work, so that our descendants are able to live on a planet where they don't have to be worried about, you know, our non-human relatives going extinct, where they don't have to be worried about their sacred places, their wahitapu going underwater, or like some of my friends or colleagues having to recognize that, you know, burial sites of our ancestors are being eroded. Like, to me, it would just be great if they could be on that land fully and, yeah, not have all of these things to worry about.
Wado, this is Jen speaking. Yeah, that's a good point about the climate. It doesn't really matter how we support storytellers and our people in the future if there's no planet to survive on. You're absolutely right. Indigenous people are one of the communities on the front lines of global climate chaos. So I want to thank each of you. This has been truly wonderful. I feel very blessed to have shared this space with the three of you. I also want to thank the Disability Visibility Project for supporting this event, and Alice Wong, who is the creator of Disability Visibility Project. Alice has been an amazing accomplice to Indigenous, disabled, and ill folks, and so just deep gratitude and thank you for that. We're also doing a book giveaway on Instagram, and so expect to get a message from me on that. We're giving away 10 copies. It can be paperback, audio, or ebook of Disability Visibility first-person stories from the 21st century, edited by Alice Wong, and I'm really honored to be one of the contributors in this book. Yeah, so we're giving away 3 of these, or 10 of these copies, excuse me. Also, I want to ask, I know that in this time of COVID and the dumpster fire that is unfortunately a lot of the world right now, people are struggling financially, but Crushing Colonialism is struggling too. We were struggling before this global pandemic. So if you have the ability to make a donation, if you are somebody with ties to deep funders, please talk to me. You can go to crushingcolonialism.org to donate. You can reach us at crushingcolonialism@gmail.com. You can also follow us on all the social media platforms. And stay tuned in November. We've got a 5-day event happening called the 3 R's, Realize, Recognize, and Reconciliation. Crushing Colonialism is one of many sponsors for this event, and it's looking at reproductive justice issues in Indigenous communities across the so-called Americas. So keep an eye on us. Thank you everyone so much for being here, and take care of yourselves, and remember to crush colonialism every day. Thank you.